A really good question to ask is, how do I get published? How does that work? What are my options? Because when you really think about it, there's a lot of information out there, and it can be very difficult to navigate all of that information and make a decision for yourself that is within your best interest. So the point of this video is going to be walking you through the three main publishing paths. Hi there, my name is Lauren, and I have experience both as an author and book launcher, and am continuing to push my way into the publishing sphere, getting one toe through the door at a time. There are three main paths: traditional, hybrid, and self. So I'm going to jump from one spectrum to the other and then meet in the middle with hybrid. So I think what I'm going to start with right now is diving deep into traditional publishing, because that is where my bread and butter is. I geek out so much with traditional publishing, just trying to understand it in order to help make it as transparent as possible and as accessible as possible when it comes to all of the information around that. This is kind of like the done for you experience. Everything's taken care of. You don't need to pay for anything. The hard part, however, is getting to that point. I think I'm going to start from the top down. When we're talking about big traditional publishers, we're talking about the big five. And the big five are all very large publishing houses that all happen to reside in New York City, because New York City loves New York City. This includes Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Hachette, HarperCollins, and Simon & Schuster. Penguin Random House is pretty much the number one out of those five. It's the number one publisher in both the States as well as the world, I'm pretty sure, which is kind of crazy to think about. The Big Five is basically a clique of the five most prestigious publishers available for authors. And typically you either have to be someone, you have to know someone, or just have like a really killer book on your hands. And then we have medium presses. So it's very much still the same sort of idea as the Big Five, except the only difference might be that they have a little bit less media. Now, some publishers like this might include Scholastic, Workman, Sourcebooks, Wiley, W.W. Norton, Kensington. And like I said, they operate very similar to the big publishers. The only difference is that their clientele might not be as prestigious and they might not have as much media coverage, because anytime we're talking about the Big Five, all of those names that I listed, there's going to be magazine articles about the books that they publish, media coverage about the books that they publish. So medium presses are like that, without all of like the fluff and balloons around it. I mentioned that just so that you're able to decide what kind of experience you want for yourself and how much time, work, energy, and money you're willing to put into publishing your book traditionally, based on medium or large size publishers. And then lastly, we have small presses. The nice thing about small presses is that they tend to take on authors who have been rejected a lot. This isn't at all meant to be like an insult to publishers or anything like that, but they're willing to take on more risk than some of those bigger publishers. And they're also more willing to work with the authors and with their stories versus some of those larger publishers who tend to buy all of the rights of your book, essentially. So they're pretty much buying it off of you. And with a small press, maybe if they do buy your manuscript off of you, they still respect your input in things like cover design. They still want you to feel like you're a part of this publishing experience. There's just going to be some resources that aren't as readily available to you as if you went to a larger publisher. Now, when we're talking about the investment, whether that be time or money, in securing a deal with a traditional publisher, this can very easily become a rabbit hole. When you publish traditionally, the nice thing is that you don't ever pay for anything. You don't pay for anything. The catch, though, is that often it'll take literal years for people to get accepted by an agent who will represent your book to pitch to publishers for them to buy it, for you to onboard with a publisher. Your first goal is to write the book and then secure an agent. That alone, like I said, can take years to do. Agents tend to be very, very selective with the works and the authors they take on, because it's a huge risk for them and for the publishing houses that they're going to be pitching your manuscript to. So when you do get partnered with an agent, typically, at least in the United States, they'll take about 15% of whatever your book sells for when the publisher buys it, which means that they get pitched to a lot. They go to conferences, they go to events. There was even one opportunity that I sort of bought my way into that was through Writer's Digest. Writer's Digest is a really good resource. And they had this 10-day agent boot camp where I paid like a couple $100s, I think, to get an agent to look over and provide feedback on my first 10 pages of my manuscript, which I thought was really, really valuable because just getting one page in front of an agent is really hard. And so I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but I thought that was really valuable just because their time is so short. So they're getting pitched to a lot of the time, which means that whatever you pitch, however you market your book, needs to be top notch. If your book is already written, that means that it needs to be in the best possible shape that it can be, especially those first 10 pages. If you have a really good pitch, then they'll think, you know what, I think there's a market for this, or I have a really positive reaction to this story, or this is really different from other books that I've gotten, or this is written really, really well. If they're willing to take on that risk, they don't get paid until you get paid, which is why this process tends to take so long and be so selective, because they want to make sure that whatever book they're representing, they're going to get paid because the book is going to get bought. This can be a little disheartening for authors, especially because, oh, it's books. Books are amazing. Books are a lifeline. Books are incredible. They're amazing, except, like a lot of other things, books are still a business and are often still treated as such, which is why it's important to kind of keep in mind that, hey, if I get rejected, it's not a knock on me personally. It's just that I'm not marketing my story in the way that I should be, or maybe I'm not prepared enough. The other thing too is they will look at your platform. If you are a first-time author like me, right now as I'm recording this video, I'm getting my very first book traditionally published. They do tend historically to look at your platform and how big of a platform you have, because if you have a large platform, that means that you are going to be able to sell your own book and you're not going to rely solely on the publisher to sell your book, because they don't always have these big marketing campaigns. If they do, if they have a big PR thing going on, big marketing campaign, it's usually for like a celebrity or something like Prince Harry or Kim Kardashian or like Jeanette McCurdy, for example. And they want to know that you're going to take some accountability and pull your weight and market the book yourself, because if they're taking your book on, they want to know that it's going to sell. Honestly, that's probably the biggest reason why anyone takes on a book, is because they know that it's going to make money. And I mean, that's a big part of it, but you know, the message of the book is also something to consider too. Like whatever they sell, they want it to mean something and make money. So it's kind of a balance of the two. So that applies to both medium and large presses. When we're talking about small presses, for example, like I said, they're going to be willing to take on a little bit more risk. However, the only downside is that if you work with a small publisher, which is what I'm doing, you might not get any advance at all. Or if you do, it's going to be a really small one, versus large publishers. If they like your book and they buy it, they'll give you sometimes a 5-figure advance. If you're a celebrity, probably even a 6-figure advance. Let's say that you get a $10,000 advance or something, for example. You are not going to make a profit on your book until that $10,000 advance is met in book sales, and then after that you'll have a split in the profit, or you'll need to like renegotiate with your publisher or your agent or something. So when we're talking about small presses, I didn't get an advance and that didn't bother me. Or if you do get an advance, be prepared for it to be very, very small. But the model still stands with small presses. However, you don't necessarily need an agent when you're publishing through a small press. It's a little bit more hands-on. I didn't have an agent. I kind of represented myself. One thing that agents will kind of do as you onboard with a publisher is they'll read over your contract, make sure that you're getting a fair share, everything is equal and equitable. But for me, because I published through a small press without an agent, I just kind of took care of the contract on my own. But it was okay. It was fine for me because the contract was very straightforward. I felt like I understood everything that it was saying. I agreed with everything that I was saying. There's nothing that I really had questions about. So I'm not really too worried about any contracts that come through with small presses. But you're always available. Like it's always an option for you to have a lawyer or someone take a look over it as well. So at the end of the day, what's in it for you? When you go with a medium or large publisher, you're going to have the name to back you up. That's for sure. Like if I got published through Penguin Random House or something, for example, or HarperCollins, I mean, there's definitely a degree of prestige that comes with that. It's no different than graduating from Northwestern or from Harvard or from Stanford. The name is going to bear a lot of weight. It's going to open a lot of doors, and it's going to grant you a lot of connections. Versus a small press, that is something that's going to be sacrificed. But for me, I really don't care that I'm not getting published through a big name right now. For me personally, success for me looks like just getting the book published. whether Hachette takes it on or whether the little mom and pop publisher down the road takes it on, that really doesn't bother me. I just care that it's made in the first place, and everything after that for me is just going to be considered a bonus. So when you're thinking about what kind of publishing path do I want to do, it's worth considering the question, what does success look like to you? So when we're talking about the value in small presses, I feel like I've kind of already mentioned this, but you're going to get a lot more involvement in the creation and the production of your book. They might let you decide, what kind of a book cover you want to have. That was a question that I got asked was, hey, what kind of design are you looking for? And I was able to kind of, spew off some ideas that I had, versus if you're going to get published through a medium or large publisher, they won't ask you that question. I wouldn't bank on it. They're going to say, yep, this is your cover, this is what we're going with, even if you don't like it. So there's always going to be a risk, there's always going to be a pro and a con. It's just a matter of what do you want for yourself and how much time, money, and energy are you willing to put into it. So we talked about traditional, kind of like a brief overview of that. We're going to switch gears over to self-publishing. You are publishing your own book. And this is great for those of you who want to have total creative freedom. If you want to reap 100% of your profits, if you want to have total, complete autonomy and control, that is what self-publishing is for. This is a popular route for people who maybe don't want to wait 12 months plus to get their book published. Maybe they don't want to spend the time, energy, or money putting together all of these resources to get an agent to get a book deal. Maybe they don't want to spend all their time doing that. The downside of that, though, is that you are responsible for everything, which also means that you are responsible for paying for everything. Writing the book, developing the book, editing the book, marketing the book, and distributing the book in exchange for more profit and a lesser timeline. And when I say more profit, I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because that's also going to be dependent on your platform. If you would consider yourself to be a social media influencer, you're going to have no problem selling the book, assuming you have a good relationship with your followers. But if you're self-publishing and you maybe don't have a large platform, that's something to consider for yourself. Is it going to bother you if you self-publish with the intent of reaping 100% of the profits, even if selling it might take a little bit more elbow grease? So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. When it comes to what retailers and services to use in order to help you self-publish your book, there's going to be a few different options for you. When we're talking about ebook distribution, there are digital retailers that have direct access to your readers, like Amazon KDP, Nook Press, which I think is through Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Kobo, and then some ebook distributors include Smashwords, Draft2Digital, and then StreetLib. If you are going to have print editions of your book, one option is going through Amazon's Ingram Spark. That's kind of like their in-house publisher, and they take care of a lot of the printing and the distribution for you. Most of the time what happens is there's going to be like a print on demand, I think, kind of format, which is like we only print the books depending on the demand. Print on demand versus, Prince Harry's book, for example. I don't know where I put mine. They probably ran like an initial X number of copies to see how well they sold. So they would have a chunk of it in a warehouse over here and then maybe another chunk in a warehouse over there. So they like stockpile the book and then print more as necessary. But when you're print on demand, it's more of like, hey, depending on the popularity of it, printing will ebb and flow. Now, when we're talking about how you get paid as a self-publisher, this is going to be probably something that's top of mind for you. When you're the author, from what I understand, you get to choose the price of the book. It is worth considering how much of an investment you've made initially in creating the book that might determine your book's price so that you know what kind of profit you're getting. Retailers and distributors are going to pay based on the price of the work, and you can also upload your work for sale at major retailers for free. Regarding ebook retailers, most will pay around 70% of retail for ebooks, even if the price lands within a particular window of theirs. So I think for Amazon, theirs is like between $3 to $10 for an ebook, I think. And then Amazon's KDP, which is their direct publishing platform, they're going to pay around 60% of the list price for print sales after deducting the unit cost of printing the book. So there's going to be a little bit of some math involved. You might want to do a little extra research on that for yourself, but just high level, that's what I've been able to deduce. So self-publishing is going to be a really great option for you if you have the money. If you don't have time, but you have the money, self-publishing is going to be a great way to get your book out into the world. Keep in mind, though, that you're also going to be responsible for the entire process that the book is going to go through, from developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, whatever you need, to marketing the book and distributing the book. There's, like I said, there's going to be different retailers and services that you can partner with to kind of help make some of these processes a little bit easier. But self-publishing is great if you don't have the time, but you have the money. Okay, next is going to be hybrid publishing, also known as assisted publishing. This is for someone who wants the freedom or the autonomy or independence of self-publishing while still having a similar structure to traditional publishing. There are different publishers that you can partner with. Some examples of this are Greenleaf. I think they mostly do nonfiction. I'm not totally sure, but Greenleaf is a pretty highly regarded one. She Writes is another one. Page 2, Marac Publishing. I think Niche Pressworks is another one. And it's important to do your research around hybrid publishing because there are such a thing as vanity presses, which tend to kind of exploit the authors while disguising themselves as a hybrid publisher. I would kind of look into that a little bit. There is going to be a price point when you're hybrid publishing, and that's usually a conversation that you have with the publisher whenever you onboard with them or as you're communicating with them. They should have a lot of that information published on their website. And here's a tip also, I learned this somewhat recently. If you see any kind of hybrid website, for example, hybrid publisher website, and they're convincing you that they're the publisher for you, if they're trying to convince you to invest in them, I would look at that with a critical eye, because as a publisher, you should know that what you're doing is right, that it's ethical, that you get results. Hey, here's what you can expect. Here's some case studies and testimonials. Book a call with us whenever you're ready. It shouldn't be pressured. If there's any kind of pressure around publishing with them, I would be a little weary of that. There are guidelines as well around what a ethical, proper hybrid publisher is going to look like. There's kind of like a checklist of ethics in a way, and you can use that for yourself. It's available to the public online, and you can kind of compare and contrast as needed with different publishers if you want to know how they match up with that like overall checklist. When we're talking about the financial investment, it can easily cost thousands of dollars to hybrid publisher work because you still are utilizing the time and energy and services of a particular team. And it can even go into the 5 figures as well too. That's not something that should be a red flag, because a lot of the websites that I mentioned, like She Writes and Greenleaf, they're going to acknowledge, hey, you might not necessarily make back the investment in book sales, so keep in mind, as you're shopping around. Even though you are going to have to pay a little bit of money up front and throughout the process, there are agreements and arrangements made with hybrid publishers that typically allow the author to reap majority of the royalties or the profits. Some hybrid publishers even offer up to 100% of net sales going directly to the author. Most of the money that you will make will most likely be from online retailers like Amazon, for example, or maybe like Barnes & Noble's online retailer, not necessarily in store, or ebook sales or something. Typically, when we're talking about hybrid publishing, Amazon is going to most likely be your best bet. It's also relatively easy to reach bestseller on Amazon, which is another video that I'm going to be making, so you should check that one out as well to get all the information on that. Generally speaking, though, the distinct specific costs as well as the model that the hybrid publisher is going to be using is something that should be talked about either in contract or when you're onboarding with them or when you're in discussion with them. That should absolutely be brought up. And if they're skirting around questions or not getting directly to, here's where your money is going, this is what you can expect in return, be mindful of this stuff. Like if you're not hearing that kind of straightforward, transparent conversation, again, you might want to keep shopping around, but it never hurts to educate yourself a little bit further on the hybrid publishing model if that's something that is of specific interest to you. So the benefit of going with a hybrid publisher is that you can publish a book without hiring several services out of pocket for a lot of different things like editing and marketing and distribution. It's usually going to be packaged a little bit more neatly for you while still allowing you some of that creative freedom. And this is going to appeal to someone who has a little bit more money than time, but they still, again, kind of want to have a bit of that structure. It'll be a slower timeline than it will be for self-publishing, but I think I personally would be willing to make that trade if I have direction and guidance and support on what my next steps are instead of having to figure it out for myself. That's my own personal opinion, but it's up to you to decide how much control and freedom you want with your book. So that is the overview of what the 3 main publishing paths are. Hopefully it wasn't too all over the place, but I did kind of want to let you know what everything sort of looked like all within the same conversation, because there's a lot of information around publishing just in general. So in terms of next steps, I'm going to suggest that you check out janefriedman.com. She has a lot of incredible resources for all authors, no matter how you're getting published. And there's one asset in particular that I'm going to direct you to, which is like this. It's like this grid that beautifully outlines all of the publishing items and what you can expect for each one, and she updates it annually, so it's always refreshed and it's always as up to date as possible. So I would say if you want more information on what to do next or what to look for, or if you're more interested in one particular model than the other, I would suggest that you check that out. So hopefully this video helped, and reach out to me at any time if you have any questions or want to bounce around ideas or get my eyes on one of your projects. See ya.